So, for those who are new to Walking Tree Technologies, a big warm welcome. So, we are a company that thrives on innovation, focusing on providing solutions that leverage AI, open source frameworks, and other groundbreaking technologies. Our mission is to empower businesses by delivering advanced tech solutions that drive efficiency, scalability, and innovation. So, today's session is all about exploring how generative AI is transforming software testing in agile environments. By automating test creation, increasing coverage, and enhancing efficiency, generative AI enables teams to scale testing efforts while maintaining high quality. So, join us to discover actionable strategies for leveraging AI driven testing to accelerate development and deliver robust and reliable softwares. So, in today's webinar, we'll start with scaling test coverage with generative AI, then explore integrating AI in CI/CD pipelines for faster releases. We'll discuss optimizing test data with AI-powered synthesis and automating UI testing to ensure quality. Next, we'll look at streamlining agile workflows with AI-powered TAP and share real-world success stories. So finally, we'll touch on the future of generative AI in software testing and upcoming trends. So we want this webinar to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section at any time. If something stands out to you or you have any thoughts to share, the chat feature is always available. Let's get started with a quick question. So, what is the biggest challenge your team faces when it comes to scaling software testing in an agile environment? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat and let's get the conversation started. So, without further ado, let me introduce our fantastic speakers for today's session. First up, we have Scott Seabolt, the Chief Technology Officer at Walking Tree Technologies, has over 30 years of experience in enterprise computing and cloud architecture. He specializes in designing and implementing cutting-edge technological solutions, including cloud-based architectures and autonomous agents. Scott's expertise in applying AI-driven innovations and his passion for new technologies make him an ideal expert to lead this discussion. Next up, we have Akshay Srivastava. With over 18 years of experience, he leads an independent delivery unit at Walking Tree Technologies, managing P&L and multi-location team. His focus on agile-driven efficiency and continuous improvement ensures tailored, high-impact solutions that enhance client satisfaction. Scaled across various technologies, he aligns businesses' goals and strategic solution technology delivery, fostering innovation and excellence. So, without further ado, let's get started. Akshay, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Anjali. Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on wherever you're located. My name is Akshay Srivastava, and I'm an Assistant Vice President Delivery at Walking Tree Technologies. Like Anjali mentioned, I hold over 18 years of experience in the industry, coming from a development background, moving into project management, and then I found my passion around agile practices and processes. So as a delivery leader and as an agile coach that I've been, I've been able to witness the challenges that come with agile development. Challenges like rapid release cycles, constant feedback loops, and the ever increasing struggle to maintain high quality in what we deliver. When it comes to agile environments essentially thrive on continuous development, right? And there is a lot of emphasis on speed and iteration. Now, while this approach leads to faster product development, faster product updates, and better alignment with market needs, it introduces a whole lot of challenges from a testing standpoint. Now, when we talk about these challenges, we can think about the code bases are evolving rapidly, right? New requirements are coming in frequently, and code bases are changing with each sprint, adding new functionality, resolving new problems, enhancing performance. And to guarantee that these recently added functionalities are covered while controlling regression, test cases need to be reevaluated at each iteration. Another challenge that I've usually seen is that testing does not contain itself to a single environment or a platform, right? Agile teams often need to ensure that the applications work across various platforms, browsers, even devices for that matter. And with each platform update, the test suite needs to be accommodative of new compatibility requirements, inter-device requirements, and that just keeps adding complexity to the testing process. And with these added complexities come the resource constraints to handle all these complexities, and maintaining comprehensive test coverage in an agile setup requires a significant number of resources, from manual testers to automation engineers to infrastructure engineers. They must all align continuously to ensure that the testing process does not become a bottleneck in the development cycle. And usually when the testing teams are under all this pressure to meet tight deadlines, this alignment tends to break down. And at the same time, rapid development and faster delivery depends a lot on continuous integration and delivery. And with these CI/CD pipelines, it's no surprise or nothing strange to anyone knowing that automation is integrated with CI/CD pipelines to ensure continuous testing. But then, are we really keeping these pipelines stable? Right? Because as the features change, the tests that we have integrated with CI/CD pipelines, they can become outdated. They can become faulty even. With new functionalities coming in, the test just may be obsolete or ineffective, eventually leading to unstable pipelines that require ongoing upkeep. Now, this is where essentially generative AI comes into picture to the rescue, right? It helps us automate test case generation, enhance test coverage, evaluate new changes for generating test cases tailored to those requirements, all while maintaining the speed and agility we need in today's fast-paced environment. I think with that, we understand that certainly when it comes to an agile-based setup, an iterative delivery setup, there's a lot of challenges that testing teams need to face, right? And for that, we need to understand what generative AI is. What is it that generative AI promises to bring to the table that can be leveraged to enhance the testing process and take that weight off the shoulders of our testing teams so that they can be more efficient. So with that, Scott, I would like you to talk us through some of your insights on generative AI.
Yeah. Thank you, Akshay. So, lots of promises around generative AI and all across the board, right? As we see generative AI being used in almost every industry now, almost every application. For us, being in the IT services space, it really does hold a lot of promise for us. And one of those big areas that we have really leveraged generative AI is this area of test automation. I've been around for a long time. It's hard for me to say 30 plus years. Akshay can still say 18. And I would still say 18, but yeah, I've been around over 30 years. So I've been in an environment, right, when there was no concept of agile development even, much less test automation. So it was a very laborious process. And with the complexity of today's environments, with the different technologies, different user personas, it really can be a very arduous and expensive part of our our effort in developing applications. And we're going to look now and explore really how does generative AI how does it step in and how does it solve some of these challenges. And as many of you know, generative AI, it refers to AI systems that can produce content at its core, right? That's kind of what it does. It can produce content, whether that be images, text, or in our case, test cases, test scripts, for example, and it does all this pretty much automatically, right? It takes a lot of effort away from the laborious tasks that a test or QA engineer might go through. So when we apply generative AI to software testing, it really brings about three major benefits. And there's certainly maybe a few more as well, but three major ones let's talk about. And, you know, the first one of those is around automated test generation. And, you know, one of the most time consuming aspects of testing is doing that. It's writing test cases. So just the actual taking the business requirement, user story, whatever the case might be, and it's writing that actual test case, right? That's where the process starts. Now with generative AI, what we can do, we can automatically create test cases based on those software specifications or requirements or even historical data. And this automation saves a tremendous amount of time, and it allows testers to focus on the more complex. So it doesn't take the tester out of the equation. It just allows them to focus more on, you know, complex to maybe more nuanced test scenarios. And, you know, for that matter, as we look upstream, and we're not talking about those things today, but even your requirements and how it can help write really good requirements is pretty amazing. But from a test standpoint, you know, we can take those requirements now, and we've got a framework we use internally even to do this, that we can take, we do a lot of agile development, obviously. So we take those user stories and try to do a good job of writing those user stories with some good detail. We're able to take those and generate, somewhere around 75% of our automated test cases now, which is a huge for us as we're doing multiple projects across different domains. That's huge for us. So big benefit there in the actual test case generation, either creating the actual test cases or creating, you know, the at the end, right, creating the automated test scripts that are used to run the tests. Another benefit that we should look at too is just increased test coverage. You would like to think that, hey, after time, you can look at requirements, you can come up with all the combinations and permutations, all the different personas that might be using the system, for example, and create good test coverage. Well, now generative AI model or generative models, they can analyze a broader range of inputs and scenarios that human testers typically discover, right? So they can take what we do as humans, but then it can even expand that and come up with more scenarios. And this really helps teams achieve more comprehensive test coverage, so they can catch more edge cases and then maybe any hidden bugs that might otherwise slip through in that process, right? So sometimes you have to read into a requirement, right? It's not every detail is always specified in a requirement, and then you try to create your test cases based on that, your scenarios. Well, generative AI can look deeper and broader at that and come up with a lot more. And we've seen a good bit of that in our work with this and automating our test scripts through generative AI, is that we do get a lot more of those edge cases and are able to catch a lot more than we were before, because, you know, generative AI can sometimes, when you're testing, you can get very tunnel visioned. Well, what generative AI does can expand that out to make sure you catch all those different personas, for example. So increased test coverage is another benefit. And then when we look at efficiency of our testing too, right, we can see really good improved efficiency. So AI-driven tests, they can drastically reduce the time needed to write and execute and validate tests. And the release cycle is really accelerated. And that way your testers, again, they can focus on those really high priority areas, while AI handles a lot of that more repetitive type tasks that you're doing in that process. So really increase efficiency, speed up your delivery. And like I said, with the framework we've kind of developed internally, we're seeing a lot of efficiency. You can imagine if you can have 70% of your test scripts taken care of, that's just huge, right? So that leaves a lot more time for your quality engineers to be able to say, okay, now let's look at some of those more complex tests, and they can focus on that. and especially right in an agile world, we don't have a lot of time. Like I said, I go back a long way, and we used to do waterfall development, and we would have one release a year. Now you can imagine what that test cycle used to be like. Well, now with the agile methodology, we're on much shorter release cycles, right? I mean, a typical release or a typical agile sprint for us is about 2 weeks. So you can imagine you gotta do all those things. You got to do the development, then you got to test it and everything within that 2 weeks. It doesn't allow you a lot of time. So with AI-driven testing, we can greatly more align with that agile schedule. More not just aligned. I know when back in the day, as I say, I can say back in the day now because I got to back a lot of days. 2 weeks was not a lot of time, and we used to freak out about 2 weeks. How in the world are we going to get anything done in 2 weeks? But now just think, and we've gotten pretty good at that now, even without automation. But now with that 2 weeks, we can do so much more and really not skimp on our test coverage, right? We can still be efficient. We can still get good test coverage with this AI-driven testing. So it's really just something that's very, very phenomenal. And in the end, if you're developing a product, or if you're like us and we're developing multiple projects, it just gives the customer a better experience, your end users a better experience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this, automating. Let's talk a little bit more about automating test case generation. So let's look closely at how AI automates test case generation, and you can kind of look at this and how the process gets broken down into really 4 major categories. And that first one is requirements analysis. And this step is feeding the AI with software requirements and specifications. Again, that can look a little different depending on what you have. It could be user stories. It could just be a requirements document, for example. We've even seen where we have to take manual test cases that were written in the past and take those and put those and feed those into generative AI, into our little framework we have that leverages generative AI, and it's able to take those and create our test scripts. So AI really analyzes that input, and it understands what the functionalities of the system are, or what it should have, and what behaviors are expected. And so can do a lot deeper analysis of that than just a human can do. Again, we're not taking the human out of the loop necessarily, but it really enhances what that person can do in order to generate quality testing. The next step in that process after requirements analysis is the model training. So we got to train the model, and we got to do it some way, right? So we typically do that by training it with historical data, maybe leverage existing test cases, look at code, look at documentation, know the best practices. So you feed all that information in and train your model, and then AI learns the patterns and structures from this data. It allows us to generate new test cases that reflect the system logic. So we do training, and then the next step of that is to actually generate the test cases. So once the model's trained, the AI generates new test cases by exploring different inputs, combinations, and scenarios. And these test cases are really often more exhaustive than manually written ones are. And you can think of it like this, the AI can think of combinations that a human might overlook. Because again, we tend to get tunnel vision in what we're doing. AI practically does not do that. So it can look at across different personas even. And the next thing that happens here, okay, so we got the test cases generated, and now what? So now we look at validation and refinement. And those generated test cases are validated by human testers. So you still have the tester there, and you're still able to look at it and say, okay, this looks good, or maybe it needs some tuning or refinement. So that human feedback helps refine AI's performance, and that ensures that that test cases are both accurate and relevant to the system that's under test. Now, this validation process is crucial in maintaining the balance really between automated efficiency and human insight. So again, I hate to use the word co-pilot, but AI is able to give us that in terms of testing, right? It's kind of our co-pilot for testing. Okay, now next let's look at what do we do? Let's leverage. How can we leverage the age, for me, the age-old problem of having test data, right? Can you ever have enough test data? I've worked in a specific industry for many years, and it wasn't easy to get that data. So you couldn't just go and do a production dump and get all the information. It might mean things like getting actual physical circuit designs and that kind of thing, right? So not data that you can easily just get your hands on in order to be able to create a test environment and the test data to be able to go ahead and test the system. Well, leveraging AI for test data synthesis, we can kind of handle that problem, right? It kind of enhances. Now it's going to enhance what we can do around having data available. So again, this is a critical area where AI can assist, and that's in the test data synthesis. And especially in agile environments, we often need fresh, varied, and realistic data for each test case. And remember, you don't have a long time to do that. So generating that data manually is very labor intensive. But AI can really simplify this through really a few things that we'll look at, right? These four different items we can look at. Again, kind of the same process, right? Data analysis, just like when we're creating test cases, we got to do analysis on the requirements. Well, in the case of leveraging it to AI to do test data synthesis, we do data analysis, and that's where the AI model analyzes existing test data and the underlying code, for example, to identify those patterns and relationships. And then the next thing we have to do, just like in the test case generation, we have to do model training. So AI has to learn from the analysis. It needs to understand what kind of data is needed and what data types and what different type tests are needed as well. Okay, the next step is then once you've done your analyzing, you've trained the model, then you can generate your data. So once it's trained, AI can generate synthetic data that mimics real world scenarios. And, back in the manual days of doing tests, we used to call this mock-up, right? And you know how mocked up data was. People were, something happens, you get a defect. One of the first things you used to have to do was look at the mocked up data. Did we really mock up the data correctly? Well, now that we have AI, it takes this process and it can do it much more closely to what is already there. So you've done your training, you've looked at your test data, and now you've generated synthetic data that's really real world like and can be used in those real world scenarios. So this data is really tailored to specific test cases, and it ensures that that tests cover really a wide range of inputs. And we used to couldn't do that, right? Because, well, what do you do? Well, we can only test this because we only had this much test data. Well, synthetic test data generation takes care of that issue. And of course, the next thing that we look at is validation and refinement. Like the test case generation, the synthetic data is validated by testers, and it's validated by testers to ensure that it actually represents what real world users would input, right? So you still got a human in the loop to go in and verify what got created is real world and realistic. So now let's look at, how do we apply generative models for using UI testing? So certainly there's back-end development that has to take place, and you need test generation for those things. And specifically, when we start talking about UI testing, let's look at that specifically and how AI can be used for that. So generative AI really can simulate, and you've heard me talk about it a little bit, but it can simulate user interactions with a graphical user interface, which is essential really for ensuring that that usability and functionality is still working. And again, it can work across many personas where we would have to start thinking, how do I think about ABC user in this system even? So it can even think across those lines as well. So when we talk about how this works, we have to look at automated UI element interactions, for example. So AI can simulate interactions with things like buttons, drop-down menus, or other UI elements, testing the interface's responsiveness and accessibility. And this can be especially useful for ensuring that the interface works across, like Akshay was talking about, different devices, different platforms, and I would say even different personas. Okay, the next thing in this whole process is of testing, doing UI development or UI testing, is looking at dynamic UI testing, right? So modern day apps have dynamic UI elements. So it's not just fixed anymore. So those UI elements are generated kind of on the fly as users progress through the application, and that can be it could be modal windows, it could be real-time updating fields. So AI can generate test cases to ensure that those element functionalities is correct. So, and even look at edge cases for those. And the last thing here we'll talk about in this section is really the visual regression testing. AI can compare screenshots of the user interfaces from different versions of the application. It can identify visual discrepancies or changes. And that's not always easy, right, to do when you're just physically looking at it as a human. You don't really realize, hey, something changed. Or maybe you even see it and say, something changed, I'm not sure quite sure what it is. Well, with AI, it can do that visual regression testing and do it accurately. So this ensures that the changes that were made in one part of the app don't break the visual layout in another. And that's true, especially in these dynamic testing scenarios. And again, we've got our own framework for this. We've also got a partner that we deal with that helps out a lot with this UI testing as well. So lots of really good options out there. Akshay, with that, being you're the really agile guy and have to deal with CI/CD quite a bit, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about how that works, how AI works, empowers testing within the CI/CD process.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And, it was really insightful to understand, what generative AI is, how is it fitting into what we do from a testing standpoint. And I think from an agile environments perspective and looking at testing in isolation from an agile standpoint, CI/CD is a crucial part of it, right? Because it is important to have when we want to deliver software rapidly. Now, AI can seamlessly integrate into the pipelines. Well, so do automation scripts, right? So what is AI doing differently? That's the question. Now, while continuous testing is a key practice in CI/CD, ensuring that every code change is tested as soon as it's committed, that is what becomes critical, right? And the traditional ways of writing automation and integrating with the CI/CD pipelines may not be as efficient anymore, right? And where it becomes critical for maintaining quality and preventing regression issues, it also needs to ensure that the increasing complexity of application does not create a bottleneck. So if we look at it from a continuous testing and CI/CD perspective, running a complete test suite, again, we may evolve the test suite using AI, like Scott has been kind enough to help us understand how. But then, is it really practical to run a complete test suite for every code commit? Right? We may be making small changes, but then running the entire test suite for that, is that really practical? Or is that really creating efficiency in the CI/CD pipeline? Probably not, right? It's going to lead to slower pipeline execution, delayed feedback, and eventually slower release cycles. So what our generative AI solution does, it really transforms this whole testing process, okay? It analyzes the changes that have been made and then automatically generates and selects the most relevant tests based on the latest code changes, okay? It analyzes different code dependencies to identify the areas that are most likely to introduce issues. It analyzes historical test performances to prioritize those tests that are most effective at catching issues. And then it uses real-time data that is synthesized by AI to detect those risky areas of the application that may need immediate attention. So it means that instead of running the entire test suite, only the most critical tests are executed. And that way AI is able to dynamically adjust the CI/CD pipeline to only execute what makes relevance with respect to the changes that have been made, identify those critical and edge scenarios that need to be tested with the code commit that has been made, and the continuous testing process stays relevant to the changes that are being made to the system. So if we talk about it from a process standpoint, so AI-powered testing tools integrate to the CI/CD pipeline, right? And these pipelines are triggered by the code commits. When the code is committed, generative AI models, they automatically execute these tests. They generate the tests, execute the tests, and validate those test cases. And then these test results are analyzed in real time by the generative AI or by the AI models. And immediate feedback is something that we get. So the entire testing process or the entire continuous testing framework that we put in place with CI/CD becomes far more efficient because we are adjusting in real time to what we really need the pipeline to execute, right? So that's where continuous integration is powered by AI and makes it more efficient, makes it more scalable. So we've talked about test case generation, we've talked about test script generation, we've talked about test data generation, and how it fits into the entire release and delivery pipeline to ensure that we are able to keep up with the agile delivery speed while maintaining high quality. So as we scale our testing processes with the AI promise, right? How do we continue to scale without compromising in quality, right? What is it that we are getting out of this entire setup that helps us scale testing without compromising on quality in any way? So AI-generated test cases, what they do is they explore a wider range of scenarios like Scott mentioned, right? Including edge cases that human testers may miss. So this ensures more thorough testing without sacrificing the agility and speed that we need in an agile environment. Regression testing, which we usually tend to automate, ensures that new code changes don't break existing functionality. Now, this is a time-consuming process, and AI can automate this process, identifying potential issues quickly and accurately. And as we do that, the issues that may arise from new changes that we are rapidly putting into any application, any system, we'll be able to detect these issues earlier in the game and flag these issues early in the development cycle, reducing the risk of costly fixes later on. So what does it lead to? It leads to a continuous improvement cycle, right? AI models learn from previous test results. AI models learn from previous test data sets and continuously improve their ability to generate high quality tests and ensure that the testing process is something that continues to evolve over time. So, the test suite that was able to learn today and evolve into something that we have today, tomorrow it may be something different. Tomorrow it's going to learn from what it learned today and then evolve into something enhanced tomorrow. So that's kind of the advantage AI brings into the table that helps us scale the testing process further. And we are able to take that pressure off our testing teams. Now, through the presentation, Scott has been talking about one of our internal frameworks that we utilize to accelerate our testing process at Walking Tree Technologies. And this framework is essentially called TAP. So TAP stands for Test Automation Partner. And what TAP does, so this is a Gen AI powered tool. It automates code generation. It automates a lot of aspects from a quality assurance standpoint. And this has been helping our teams substantially in accelerating the development and quality assurance processes. So what TAP essentially brings to the table for us and what we've been able to implement internally, it can generate unit test cases by plugging into the code repositories and generating unit tests, and in turn significantly enhancing the unit test coverage and code quality. What TAP is also doing for us is automated test cases and automation script generation, enhancing efficiency for our teams by close to 70-75%. And this really helps our continuous testing and QA processes, because TAP also seamlessly integrates with our CI/CD pipelines and evolving along with the code changes and knowing what to test and when. So that's the promise that GenAI has brought to the table for us, and we've been able to leverage it for some of our key customers, and we've been able to leverage AI to really accelerate our testing process. Some real world examples that I can quote for you. So we work with a global e-commerce platform, and the use case that we took up with them was to automate the test cases generation and the script generation for new features. And what we were able to realize was that the test suite maintenance effort was reduced by as much as 60% for this customer. Okay, the continuous evolution of the automated regression suite, the continuous evolution of test cases, rapid generation of test cases was able to bring down the test maintenance effort by 60%. Also, one of our key customers who are a cloud-based SaaS provider, so they had a legacy application that was written that has evolved over the last 10 years or so. And a lot of that code base did not have any unit test coverage. The risks and issues that were introduced into the system because of that, the code quality was taking a hit. Issues were going down into production. We were not able to, identify regression issues effectively because it was a humongous application written over 10 years of duration. So as we plugged TAP into the ecosystem, we were able to enhance the unit test coverage by as much as 60%. Right now, we are standing at a 90% unit test coverage, which is able to, identify and detect issues very, very early in the development cycle, so that we are able to minimize issues rolling out into quality assurance. And since this is a huge application and there are frequent changes going in, automated regression was absolute need of the hour. And with TAP coming into the picture and the generative AI solution that we were able to leverage, we were able to reduce the automation effort by as much as 70% by evaluating the code base and generating automated scripts for any new features that were coming into the application. Similarly, we were working with a leading fintech company where the efficiency of our CI/CD pipelines was enhanced by 50%. How this happened was, so like the UI testing using AI that Scott was talking about, right? So we have a partner who provides us with a solution for self-healing UI testing. So any objects, any models that change on the UI, any new changes that come up on the UI, any dynamic elements that are coming up on the UI, we were able to identify them and enhance our automation scripts by introducing a self-healing platform into the ecosystem. And that made our CI/CD pipelines far more efficient because we were not looking at failures at the pipeline level anymore. Right? So the test cases were able to evolve and adapt to the changes that were being made onto the application. And the test failures on the CI/CD pipeline were reduced to bare minimum, and that was able to enhance the efficiency by 50% for this company. So that brings us to an interesting question. I mean, we've done so much, right? We've made substantial progress in leveraging AI to improve on the testing process. We've made substantial progress in ensuring that testing is not becoming a bottleneck in fast-paced agile environments. So what's next, right? That's the question. We know generative AI and AI/ML models, they are evolving every day. So what is it that Gen AI is bringing us in the upcoming days, in the upcoming months and years? So Scott, here I would like to hear from you how you see the future of generative AI from a software testing perspective. Scott, you're on mute, sorry.
Good. I thought it might be best if I stay on mute, but no. Yeah, sorry, thanks. Yeah, no, I was just looking at some of the questions we were having there, so I got some of those current issues in my mind. But yeah, now when we think about the future of generative AI and testing, it's definitely something, especially myself from a CTO perspective, and certainly from your perspective, Akshay, for delivery. I mean, there's lots of amazing things that I can think of. But what we've kind of outlined here is, about 5 different areas that I think are going to be pretty impressive in the future of generative AI when it comes to software testing. And I think that that first one, that hyper personalization, AI will be able to, it'll really enable us to test for individual users. I keep saying personas, and that's really kind of what I'm talking about is, individual users. We can tailor those tests for those individual users, or maybe it's devices, right? Maybe it's different configurations, and that'll make testing even more relevant and efficient for us. So I would say just being able to personalize those tests for different things, different elements, for different devices and so forth. A lot of times we write our test cases and we write our test scripts even to go out and test things. We'll do that, and we won't necessarily do it on a device specific. Now we can really tailor those tests to test certain functions. Like you may have an iPhone, you may have an Android. Well, how the application, especially what I've seen in cross-platform development, is eventually that cross-platform code has to be creating or being able to leverage those different devices, and you need to test certain things on one device that might not be available on another. So this will enable us now to be able to really specifically do those things. So now, well, it works on Android, but it doesn't work on iPhone. We've got a bug on the iPhone code. Maybe we got an issue with Swift code, for example. And this is going to really help us to be able to generate those things specifically. So taking your application code and then being able to generate test cases specific to those devices. So it's going to make that process easier and more efficient. I say the other,
and I think this is a very, very real world problem. I mean, quite recently, we've had this challenge where, our customers have come back to us and said, can you test it on different versions of iOS even? Right? Some of the older iPhones do not have compatibility with iOS 18, and some of our customers may be having them. Yeah. So can you test it on iOS 17 as well as iOS 18? And that's where this becomes a need of the hour, to have personalized and tailored testing suites for every kind of individual and user.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think along with that, I mean, certainly not just in testing, but in general, the advances of these AI models and capabilities is just insane. I mean, what we see, a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe not 2 years, maybe in a year ago, we had basically we're operating on one GPT version at a time. So even OpenAI, you can go out now, and there's multiple models out there for different things, right? For different purposes. So the advancements in modeling capabilities is just incredible. And so what we see is those models become more sophisticated, And with that, they're going to be able to generate more complex test cases and test data. So that whole process is just going to continue to be improved by the advances in model development. And then I think the other is, around AI automation, we're moving towards fully autonomous test execution, where the AI really manages that entire test life cycle. And what that's going to do for us, again, it's not that you take the tester out of there, but they're still in the loop and they're able to just kind of go ahead and verify that the test executed well and kind of give it a visual. But pretty much, we're going to see, and I think honestly, actually, if we look at even what we're doing currently within Walking Tree, a lot of that test life cycle is already, it's not completely autonomous, but it's getting close for sure. The other thing is that I find really interesting in this space is around predictive testing. We've heard about things like predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, depending on what kind of domain you're working in. But AI will soon be able to, and I say soon, honestly, I'm already reading articles, right, in different scenarios where we're able to do predictive testing. So you can look at it and say, hey, AI is going to be able to proactively identify potential issues before they occur, and that's going to lead to fewer bugs, smoother releases. So some pretty interesting things that we're going to be able to do around that. And I was talking with another CTO yesterday about really how AI is progressing, and it's getting to that point, right, where I call it a sweet point, where we're really starting to use AI in our day-to-day. And what's exciting is to start looking at the next steps, and predictive testing is part of that. And also, companies now are starting to look at even quantum computing, and then how do you start tying that and even progressing AI even more? Anyway, it's just there's so much there around what AI is going to be able to do for us, and certainly predictive testing is going to be a big part of that. That'll be phenomenal. And I think the last area, and we've kind of talked about it, but I think it just will continue to get better and better, and that's around AI-powered test optimization. So with continuous learning, that's going to ensure that the AI gets smarter with every test cycle. It optimizes, it adapts based on real-time feedback. So, again, as the technology continues, and honestly, as we start adapting or adopting AI to do our to help do our testing, software testing, it's just going to get better and better, because we're going to continue to give it that feedback, and it's going to continue to learn. And so, hopefully we'll get to some point where it's just an expectation now that we don't have software bugs. We certainly don't have any functional bugs. And if there is, it's because someone forgot to use AI to do the requirements, right? So I'm joking about that, but seriously, we want to get to that point. We'll get to that point where, where we're really relying on AI as much as we can. And what that's going to do for all of us in this IT space is developers, testers, architects. It's just going to allow us to do so much more with our jobs, right, and what we're doing. So we'll be able to be innovative and create faster. So like anytime, it looks a little scary. And, when we start thinking about doing AI-driven development, AI-driven testing, we're always concerned about, well, AI is just going to take the place of X, Y, Z. The way technology always works, and I see this the same way, it's just going to enhance what these different roles in the software development process are doing. So to me, it's exciting. And I think from what we've seen, and Akshay, you can testify to this because you work day to day with our developers and testers and technical leads, but I think it's really improving what they do. And honestly, I think it's given them more excitement about what they're doing.
Absolutely. I can second that.
Well, cool. Well, I know we're kind of getting upon time, but we'll leave a little time to answer some of these questions. I think are a bit more detailed. I started typing some out, but I think we'll just try to sort of answer some of them a little more live. But I'll just conclude it with this before we go into Q&A. So just wrapping up, to me, it's clear that generative AI is reshaping the landscape of software testing. I mean, among many other areas, of course, but it's gonna allow us to automate and scale testing in agile environments, really while maintaining, the highest levels of quality, which is kind of an issue. We tend to do agile development and we push it out, and we leave the testers 2 days to try to figure out how to test the thing. Well, now we can start being more efficient in both those roles, so and not have to give up and sacrifice quality. That's going to really result in faster releases, improved product stability, and ultimately just better user satisfaction, honestly. And that's kind of what it comes down for all of us. We want our users to be able to use our system and enjoy using it. And with that, I think now we'll, Akshay, unless you have any other comments to close, let's get to the Q&A.
No, I think you've covered it quite precisely, Scott. So yeah, I agree to the point that it's absolutely changing the landscape of how we do testing. And so far, we've seen significant results out of what we do at Walking Tree. And yeah, with that, I would like to open it up for Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah. So moving on to the Q&A session, feel free to ask anything related to our discussion today, and we will address your questions promptly. So we have received few questions in the Q&A box. Sweta Sharma is asking, any Gen AI tools recommended to test Gen AI applications?
Well, there's some tools out there. I mean, honestly, when it comes to what Walking Tree does, we've got our kind of own framework developed internally to do that testing. But we use generative AI, so we're essentially hooking into the GPT models to do that, and as well as some of the other open source frameworks as well. So we always try to make sure when we do things internally, keep in mind, don't just get hung up on one particular model out there, but be able to use several. Now our tools, and in our tool, we're using things like Lane Chain and even Lane Graph now to start this multi-agent, this agent ecosystem in terms of what we're doing around testing as well. So we use a lot of the common technologies out there to develop our framework, but then we also have partners to do from a generative AI testing. Like Akshay mentioned before, we got a partner called Virtuoso, and certainly we use those, especially around the UI testing. That tool does a very good job and leverages behind the scenes, leverages generative AI to help do that UI type testing. So that's certainly one of them. I think, and again, being a dev shop, that's kind of what we do. Most of what we do, we kind of custom work on it. But that TAP framework that we use is really based on, Lane Chain, Lanesmith. So hopefully that gives you an idea there. All right, next question, Anjali.
So Richard Wilson is asking, how can generative AI assist e-commerce companies in testing for dynamic pricing algorithms and personalized recommendations that change based on user behavior?
All right, that's kind of, let me think if I can answer that one in kind of short order. I think now let's see what the question is. How can generative AI assist e-commerce companies in testing for dynamic pricing algorithms and personalized recommendations that change based on user behavior? Okay. I think probably the first one I would say is, looking at using Gen AI in terms of scenario-based testing. So when you got scenario-based testing for, especially in dynamic processing, those Gen AI models can really simulate those complex scenarios that might be interesting, because that's an interesting issue, right? So when we're talking about behavior-driven pricing, you've got to be able to have a strategy behind that, right? What are those influences? And I think you can use AI to do things like, for example, we use not necessarily an e-com, but essentially the same concept, and that's to look at different let's say you're marketing something, for example, and you put it out there, you write an article on it, and then you start looking at the sentiment. So you look at social media, for example, and you start looking at the sentiment of what happened when you put that out there. So I think with AI, you can a lot easier now kind of look at that behavior and kind of use it to determine, what is the behavior of the feel of the user, whatever case that might be. I can imagine scenarios like that, being able to look at it and say, well, we put this product out there. Is it selling? Did that ad campaign work? What's the sentiment? What's being said on social media, or what's being said on different articles that are in blogs that are getting written? So you can use AI to really look at some of those things. And I think too, we talked a lot about synthetic data generation. And I think AI is especially good at this, right? And we're really seeing a lot of good data that's being generated out of that. Among other things, we use even Unreal Engine to create virtual worlds. And for robotics, for example, those robots were able to, like a drone, can go out and it can look at different environments, the synthetic environments that get created, come back, generate images even, and we can use that data, and we can use that to train AI models even. So synthetic data generation to me is a sweet spot for AI to be able to handle too. So that's a brief. That doesn't answer the whole question, I know. I think that's a good conversation. And Richard, I'm out there on social media. Connect with me, and I'll be able to really be happy to talk to you in depth about that one a little more too.
All right. So Abrar is asking, what kind of impact does Gen AI has on our project's cost efficiency?
Okay, I can take that one.
There you go.
So from project's cost efficiency, it definitely adds significant value, Abrar. Because Gen AI has kind of a significant impact on a project's cost, offering ways to reduce cost, streamline process, and even increase productivity, right? I mean, where Gen AI handles routine tasks like, let's say, data entry or report generation, or even basic code writing, right? It reduces the need for manual labor, saving on resource costs. Mm-hmm. And resources even are, now can be more efficiently allocated to higher value activities because by automating some of these tasks and making our projects move faster, we are minimizing some of the time-related expenses on project, right? So that is another way where Gen AI helps in reducing project cost. Also, one of the larger costs that projects need to deal with is rework. And by helping identify potential issues early on and making our testing processes more efficient, the rework gets significantly reduced, because that is where the rework is really coming, right? You face issues and you fix them, then you retest them. That is all the rework that is getting introduced into projects and is really taking a stab at our cost. So by leveraging Gen AI for testing, this is one of the biggest sources of cost reduction when it comes to a project execution. And quality control, again, from a testing standpoint, as we've talked about throughout the presentation, AI-driven quality checks, this is really reducing our cost of defects, right? So in a nutshell, if you look at it, there's a huge plethora of activities that can be automated and can be made far more efficient using Gen AI that can significantly impact the cost of a project, right? Knowing that Gen AI is able to take care of routine tasks, some of our skilled resources are now able to spend most of their time in optimization and innovation, right? Which brings an added value on top of productive development. And so that's in a nutshell. If you ask me, Abraham, that's how I see it in terms of the projects that I'm running. And I'm there on LinkedIn. I'm there on different social media. You're free to connect with me and we can talk more in detail.
All right. So Hudson Walt wants to ask, how does AI-driven testing adapt when there are significant changes in software architecture?
So at a high level, Akshay, you can probably answer this one better because it kind of comes back to what changed, right? Something changed now in your code, and how do we use that in that whole testing process? I can probably try to address it from a technical standpoint, how we do it. I think probably the question more is, hey, how do we handle changes? You know, you're sitting out there, you've got this test suite running, you got your CI/CD process running well, and then bam, here comes some changes. How do you address those kind of things? I think probably less technical and more hypothetical might be a better way to answer the question.
No, yeah, and great question, Hudson. And I would like to start answering that question by saying that significant changes in software architecture, they just don't come out of the blue, right? When it comes to code changes, iterative development helps us take things few at a time, and architecture changes are something that's taken at a larger level. Now, what AI-driven testing does for us is with each iteration, it's able to identify those specific changes to an application or those specific changes to a system, identify those edge cases and impact areas that will be affected by that change, and tailor the test suite to really come up with something that adjusts to what is really important to validate at that point of time. But if you ask me, when you talk about significant changes in the software architecture, that's something of a larger initiative, right? And when it comes to that, even iterative development around changing the software architecture and writing code around it, that's something AI can help tailor to that change in terms of taking those iterative steps and evolving our testing towards that. Scott, would you like to add anything from a technical standpoint?
Yeah, no, I think, the good thing from a technical standpoint is the fact that we do have AI to help us out there and help us look at those things when they change. The good thing is the tool sets that we have now, especially around being able to, and it kind of relates to another question I saw, but being able to have this agent ecosystem, for example, that can start looking at different things that might be changing and kind of quickly address, either automatically address changing those test cases or even at least alerting, right? Even if we're not there, you can kind of tell something changed, even if it's not something that we can automate or make autonomous just yet. The technology is already at a point where we can see those changes. Hey, this is significantly changed. We're going to have to kind of go back and relook at these test cases. So I think part of that whole operations, that ops part of this whole thing is important in that process. And certainly when it comes to kind of almost getting to the point where we can settle, right, the tech's out there to be able to do those things. I think now it's just being able to efficiently put it together and adapt the code to do that. And again, I think with these large language models, they're getting better and better and better at generating code. And so I think that you definitely have the tool sets out there to do a lot of this now. With your agent ecosystem, especially, I like that part of it, that you can just sit there and monitor. Okay, you can have an agent look at this, and then you can have those agents even talk to each other to say, hey, there's changes here. You need to go back and relook at this and make sure that these tests get updated, right? So the tech's there, and I wouldn't say that we're at the point where we are at an absolute full trust that it's going to do that automatically. But we definitely are at a point where we can use it to monitor those things and then be able to use the system to automatically generate the tests again.
All right. So Manasa wants to ask, what are the challenges AI faces in terms of testing complex machine learning models, especially in domains like finance and healthcare, where accuracy and security are critical?
Yeah. Gosh, they're still as far as the technology has come, and it's come a long way, even the past few months. But there's still things that we deal with, right? We still have to deal with accuracy and precision and bias and those kind of things. But I'll say this: I think that we're getting, again, the tech's getting better and better, especially around being able to. Sorry, guys, need to silence my phone here. Especially when it comes to bias and things like that. We're able to create algorithms now that are getting rid of a lot of those things, but there's still things that we have to be concerned with, right? With these different models. So hallucinations, bias, fairness, accuracy, precision, um, and just, sometimes it just doesn't know how to interpret everything. And I think a big area that I've seen good progress in is in healthcare. So if you ever look at a healthcare, like an EHR, healthcare record, there's no, and we've talked about interoperability of these systems with different, different providers. It's tough. You can't just make a doctor or a nurse or some kind of practitioner, right? Just go in and always use a specific language to speak to when they write up their notes. So just in being able to interpret those things and be able to explain that are still a bit of an issue. But again, I'm seeing big hospital systems that are using these to interpret things in the healthcare record even. So it's getting there, but that would be another thing that we have to deal with. Again, it goes back to model trust and still having ways to have humans come in and having a human in the loop type paradigm and everything. So those are some of the big ones. I would say maybe to add on to that too might be just regulatory things and compliance requirements, that sort of thing that might not, maybe those things aren't easily accessible to where, kind of the commercial large language models now. What data? You have to always think, how's the large language model getting its information, right? And is that information available in a public way that it can get there? So those are things. Regulatory and compliance requirements are still a bit of an issue. But again, we're getting to a point now where you can run models and have models that are going to maintain data privacy, but also we are able to use some of that technology to be able to even come up with requirements and compliancy scenarios, well, where they can monitor compliance and regulatory things. A lot more to say about that one too. I won't, but there's a lot of good stuff there. That's a good question.
All right. So, Scott, we do have one more question. Like you have already answered that in chat, but would you like to elaborate this a little more?
That's around the HIPAA compliance.
Yes. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question is, how can AI-driven testing support HIPAA compliance for healthcare applications and ensure data privacy when testing systems handling sensitive patient information?
Okay, good. Yeah, I think, and I have to go back and probably look at my answer to make sure I answer it kind of the same way. But just in general, you always want to use, right? You want to use a good platform if you're using a cloud. Most of the cloud providers are now able to provide good infrastructure that's going to help you maintain compliancy. But I mean, ultimately, compliancy and security, data privacy, that kind of thing, it always kind of falls back on that shared model if you're working in the cloud, right? Partially the cloud provider is responsible, but ultimately, we as developers, as architects in the technical space, we still have to be able to maintain and make sure that compliancy and that privacy happens. So first is getting a good partner to run your platform or to run your application And then the other is looking at things like, especially when it comes to healthcare information, I think being able to create synthetic test data is really a crucial thing, right? So we can use some real data to look and to train and to be able to create synthetic data. And I think ultimately that is the amazing thing that you can do with synthetic data is you can recreate synthetic data in a way that you can use it to test your applications. And I would say even in the realm of writing health record information and that kind of thing that it can be used for. So I think the first one is synthetic data generation. That way you don't have to worry then about things like data masking and anonymization. Although, that's another thing you can look at too, is using AI to automate the process of doing data masking, where you're replacing, anything that's identifying a patient, any of that patient identification information. You can do that. You can anonymize it, or you can create it synthetically, for example. So you can even automate some of that. And then again, that kind of goes back to with the compliancy monitoring. And AI can do that really well. If you can train it, as you train it to do so, it can look at compliancy and regulatory. And you can do that monitoring, put the human back in the loop, for example, and to do your compliance monitoring and have it flag and say, whoa, you can't submit this violated a compliancy check of some sort. So you can do compliancy monitoring. You can do, again, your security automation, that kind of thing. You can use AI for doing that. And then, beyond that, I mean, it kind of comes back with probably some of the traditional things too, probably around just around like role-based access, that kind of thing. So those are kind of things really I think you do anyway. So I wouldn't put that into that category of what AI does necessarily, but using RBAC and I suspect, I guess too, just thinking, even with role-based access, we can use AI to help generate that even. So when we're creating our infrastructure and our role-based access, that kind of thing, our authorization and authentication mechanisms, we can even use AI in that. So those are a few things. Those are deep questions, but those are a few things that we can do for sure. And AI can help in all of those. Even you can even use AI to help police itself. So, but again, it's not the end all be all. When we are in software development, so when we're developing, when we're architecting, when we're testing, it really always kind of comes back to us, guys. We use AI as a tool, but I still see that ultimately we're responsible for what we're developing, right?
All right, so we are done with the Q&A session here. So thank you so much to our incredible speakers, Scott and Akshay, for sharing their expertise today, and a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope you found the discussion insightful and inspiring. So we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Stay tuned for the updates and have a fantastic day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.